Hey, welcome to the prototype method. This is a short tutorial about how to make prototypes. I've always been really interested in prototyping, and I've decided that I'd like to share some of that knowledge back to the people who I'm designing with and also to anyone else that wants to listen. So today we're going to focus on part one of the prototype method, which is a mock-up sprint. So at the end of this tutorial, I'm going to challenge anyone who is in the range of my voice right now to a 7-day UI design sprint challenge, where we all design an app a day based on some idea that we have and get mock-ups based on that application. These are going to be static mock-ups, so they shouldn't take more than a couple hours each day. And we were not going to put a lot of time and effort into it. We're just trying to get down the very first part of prototyping and get some practice. So I guess before we get into how exactly to make a prototype, there's the question of why we should make a prototype. Well, if you were to take your mobile phone out right now and open your favorite application, it probably seems like a pretty straightforward idea. Think of, let's say, Twitterrific, one of my favorite mobile applications. Well, I love Twitter. Twitterrific gives me a great way to access that service, and it's very delightful, and as a user I really like it. Well, it probably seems like developers make all the money they want based on their brilliant, world-changing idea, right? Well, not exactly. For how simple and how great mobile applications are, the process of making an application can be very complex. People who have great app ideas find out a lot of the time that it is incredibly difficult to get started on making an app in a really easy way. Check out a great piece by David Wiskus, which will be linked to at the end of this show, about making a great application. Today we're going to be focusing on how you can take a good idea for an application and play around with the UI design ideas. And at the heart of every good prototype is a good idea. So it's really important that you start with some kind of novel and interesting idea for a mobile application before you jump right in. The world doesn't really need any more fart apps or even that many more Twitter clients, but it might need something like, let's say, a Twitter client that is fart-based. That's kind of not true, but it kind of represents the idea that we need more novelty and more originality and creative thinking as we start the prototyping process. So it turns out that there are a lot of things in the way of your great app idea and the actual app itself. Some of these are listed here. People, the amount of money it would cost, the amount of time you have to put into it, the heartache of having, it not work out, and the, knowledge and acumen to actually make your app a reality. That's where the prototype comes in. Because if we start with a prototype, we don't have to actually address all those obstacles until we want to get to that point. Even if we can overcome all of those logistical challenges, the app we end up with might not even be the app we liked or the app we thought it would be, and it might not even be commercially successful. So this is where prototyping can help. Prototyping allows us to build an idea into something that looks like an app but isn't really an app, without using all the resources and investment that actually building an app would entail. So in a way, we're cheating by making an app without all the things that suck about making an app. This doesn't mean that we are making fake apps. If you prototype quickly and make changes to our prototype as we go, we can learn a lot about what our app is and what it will become. If we prototype again and again before we start actual app development, we can move from very, very basic design and less realistic looking design to more realistic looking design as we prototype again and again. So by starting with designs that are less real and prototyping quickly and often, we move our prototypes into looking more and more real. As we move through this process, we learn a lot about our design assumptions and about our design problems, which can inform the next prototype that we make. When it comes finally time to make the app we want to make, we have a history of our design thinking to validate our efforts. So why? Why a prototype? The prototype circle is simple and effective. It starts with making fake apps. And then we move on to showing those fake apps to people. And then we go to learning from the feedback that those people give to us. And it looks a little bit like this. We loop through the process as many times as we can because each loop makes our final prototype much stronger and makes our eventual product more user-oriented. So how can you prototype? This is probably the most intimidating part of prototyping, is that everyone sees prototyping or hears the word prototyping and thinks, oh, I have to know code, or oh, I have to know some kind of system of prototyping. Well, it turns out there's actually a pretty infinite amount of tools and resources at our disposal as people who know how to use computers. And even if we don't know how to use computers, in just actually drawing out a prototype. So really, we should pick the thing we're most comfortable designing in and using that. I subscribe to Apple's workflow for prototyping, which they presented at WWDC in a presentation called Fake It Till You Make It. There's a link to that presentation at the end of this deck. But the tools used to make prototypes are endless, and picking the tool that you are most proficient in is usually the best way to begin. If you find a tool is limiting your ability to make a good prototype in the way you'd like, then you can try and learn something bigger and badder. But really, MS Paint could make a good prototype tool if you use it right. So don't feel the need to learn big new fancy programs unless you really want to. I subscribe to Apple's workflow for, I've already told you about how I really like Apple's workflow for prototyping. I really recommend watching that presentation. It's a link at the end of this slideshow if you have the time. And I'll be using the tools that they recommend, which is primarily Keynote. Keynote is really great because it allows you to make static mockups at first, and then when you're ready, later in the process, you can move into animation. This is probably not the way you're used to looking at Apple's presentation software, but keep an open mind because Keynote's a pretty incredible tool for prototyping. Today, we are just going to focus on making static pictures of the UI with Keynote. Since we're trying to make a mockup every day for a week, we have to let go of making everything perfect. So every day, we're going to come up with a different app mockup. We have to let go of visual polish, aesthetics, put aside concerns about our wireframe structure or navigation, and ignore the potential success of the service the app is going to offer, and simply try to get our one idea across as a possible UI. So no wireframes, no animation, no demos, just ideas that we're going to present as UI mockup. Jeff McDonald, a creative technologist at the Martin Agency, calls this rapid thinking. He'd have our class do an exercise where we would try to unburden any concerns about our ideas by writing them down the minute they came into our mind without editing anything. This prototype method is very similar to that in that you should just go with the first couple of ideas that you have. And you'll see later there's ways to elevate that thinking, but really we just want to get something down that represents the idea that we have. So a couple months ago, I had an idea for an app that would let members of my class at Brand Center document our sessions and topics that we discussed in class. So I wrote that down in one of my notes-taking apps for my iPhone. Well, today we're going to prototype that idea with the prototype method, and by the end of our session, we'll have a rough prototype that took a couple of hours to make and will look something like this. Okay, well, let's move on to our prototype method. So first, we have to pick a feature set of that day's app. So we're going to agree on 7 different ideas from the group of us that are going to do this. And we're going to first start out by writing down 3 to 5 features that you think your app would need. So this is not necessarily something you think the app would be cool if. It's more like, what would the app need to do at a basic level? 3 to 5 features should be fine. Next, we're going to write down 3 to 5 features that would make your app different than what's currently in the category. So if, let's say, I was doing a Twitter application, well, a list of tweets might be something that I would need, but it's not necessarily something that makes my app different. What if those tweets were represented by planets, or what if they were represented by cars? That might be a feature that would make my app different. So you'll write down 3 to 5 of those as well. From these 6 to 10 features that you have written down, write a single sentence that would describe the app you're trying to make. And that will end up looking something like this, which I did for our documentation app. So better documentation of our IA class, which is information architecture. I wrote down the 3 things that the app would need would be multiple users could submit, the ability to attach pictures or files, and to comment or like posts. The 3 differentiating features was maybe instead of coordinating with posts, we could make it coordinate with calendar and be more calendar focused. It could help with versioning the different projects we have inside of our design class, and maybe even create a library of design inspiration to pull from when you're working on a project. So my sentence turned into an app that documents what we learn in IA through quotes and eventual deliverables. Those are some fun words, and my fellow experienced designers will recognize some of them. So that's really the first step in the process, is that we need to pick a feature set of the day's app and write down that, in a notebook or just wherever. So second, we now need to find some UIs to model. Now, unless you're a pretty experienced UI designer, it would really be your best bet to try to base your design on some kind of convention you see in other applications. So first, we're going to search for 2 to 3 apps that lead the category and look at their UI conventions. This is a video of me going into the App Store. I'm going to go in the App Store and search for productivity applications. So I'm going to pick something that might look a little bit like the features that I need in the application. So I'm going through the top charts. I don't really see anything for productivity here. So I'll jump over to free, my wish list, nothing there. So maybe I'll just search top grossing. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. So I'm just going to go into the category section and go to productivity, see if I see anything that looks fun there. Looks like most of these are to-do lists. Not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more group contributing applications. Maybe I'll search for one of the apps I know is really popular right now, called Slack. Slack is a way to manage across different teams. So I'll search for that. And this is representative of what you should do anytime you're looking for UIs. Go to the page that, I already have Slack, but I still am going to go and look at the screenshots of the application to see its primary use case scenarios. Okay, so yeah, this looks a little bit more like what our objective is. Maybe I can read the description for the application. Cool. Yeah, so this is one of the applications I'm going to use to base my UI convention on. I'm going to open it up and just take a look. It doesn't look like I have very much, so I would really encourage playing around with the application, just doing a couple of different things. That way you can kind of get a feel for what your UI conventions will look like. Like here, I think this will look a lot like just a feed of chats. And let's see, if I add another one, it will just probably go in right below. I'm having some trouble with the shift key on iOS. ×3. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so when I hit that, okay, so it's basically showing a group of messages, and I can add files or other messages. It's a little clunky of a UI, but, it's pretty. I don't have any other members. look at some of the settings. So, okay, I've got a general feel for how this UI works. So maybe I'll move on to another set of applications that help me understand the conventions of this type of application. Okay. So on this application, I think I'm going to take a look at my docs. So Google Docs is something I'm a little bit more familiar with. Here's a list of all of the documents that I'm sharing with my team. Gives me the document itself, and it's very heavily focused on the document. I can see comments about this document. I can resolve or reply to them kind of in a chat style. I can even share with additional people. It doesn't really show me very well who's sharing this document. So maybe I'm learning a little bit more about what I don't like about applications that allow for group chat. Okay, well, now that I've gone through a couple of apps that help me manage documents in teams, perhaps I'll go look at one that allows me to interact with my team by liking or posting things. And for me, that's my CTeasers group, which is a bunch of the user designers at the Brand Center. And we post things here and just chat with each other. So there's an element of social interaction, and I really love Facebook's Paper. So maybe I would want to incorporate some of the things I really like about Facebook's Paper, like this tiled timeline where I can scroll through all of the work and conversations that we've had. I also really want to bring in possibly the ability to comment or like something quickly. That way I can scroll through what everyone's saying, maybe make that a little more obvious and a little bit more on the surface. So simply by looking at a couple different applications, now I have some things I like and things I don't like, and things that are conventions and things that break the conventions. This is going to be really helpful for me down the line. And actually a very important part. So a lot of this also is not something you're going to sit down and do, at once. It's probably you're using these new applications and new things over time, and that way you know what you like and what you don't like. So now I'm going to pick 2 to 3 apps that actually are from other categories that have nothing to do with the thing I'm trying to do, and look at their UI conventions and see if I can take anything from their UI conventions and bring it back to my prototype design. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to look at The Economist, which is one of my favorite applications for reading news stories. It's fairly recently redesigned, and I think it has a really nice, clean look. The content at the top is under the actual navigation. And the navigation looks pretty. I like the banners that don't go all the way across, the really nice arrows. I also really love the ability to change date, which we talked about before. So that was Friday, and I'm going back to Thursday. That was one of the things I think we can make a differentiating part of this application. So now that I've got a little bit of a taste for another application that can inform my process, we're going to head to the next step. So based on the different conventions that I've looked at, I'm going to draw 2 mock-ups, and they're simple mock-ups. One's going to be a conventional UI, and the other is going to be an innovative or disruptive UI. So one that I would say, this is what I would expect this app to look like. And then another that would say, this is one that I don't expect this app to look like, but might be interesting. So I did this, and since it's pretty boring to watch the whole thing, I'm just going to play you a time-lapse of it. So first I wrote down all of my ideas, then we went through all of the ways that you do that. And you pick your sentence, and then you mock up. I mock up with a stencil I bought. But you can use a ruler, you can use pretty much anything you like. It is nice to try to get it at the size that it will be, just so you have more of a feeling, but it won't matter too much. This is more for you to feel like you understand what your application should look like, might look like, and getting your ideas onto paper. It's really important to start with paper first. I didn't really used to believe that, but I'm a big believer in that now, because you have to think about every piece of the UI instead of on digital, where you just have to think about the piece that you're making right then. So I really encourage you to make a very simple UI modeled after one that you would expect and one that you would not expect. So what that looks like, this is the conventional one where there's like a chat posting of different items from the class that we're in, and that's what you would expect, with the ability to add in the bottom left corner something besides text, and also text to maybe a list of things that save somewhere else. Well, I thought it would be cool to take the economist view and put it into my app idea. So this way, the top of the UI is where I decide what date the class was, and I can scroll through by class and it will show me different sections like the subjects we discussed, or the assignments that were due that day, or even the quotes of what other people were saying. So when I get to this point, I'm looking at both of these UI conventions, and I'm saying, okay, well, which one is more important? Is it more important that I keep with the convention because the convention's there for a reason? Or is it more important that I make something fresh and a little bit more fun? And in this case, since I'm making the app for myself, I want to use the more disruptive technique. Okay, so now this is where we're going to start moving from atoms to bits, which is another Jeff McDonald saying. So open the design tool of your choice. This could be Keynote, Creative Suite, Photoshop, and Illustrator. Sketch is a new one everyone really likes, or Omnigraphal. You can do other applications like InVision or different prototyping applications, but it's really not that important for this exercise that you use those, because we're not going to make any interaction at first. We're just making mock-up. So we're going to set the dimensions to fit the device you are prototyping for, and that'll look a little bit like this. I like to use the Kinotopia library. So Kinotopia.com has a bunch of stencil libraries, and for a relatively cheap amount of money, you can make pretty much any device you can think of, and they update very regularly. So when new devices come out, they'll have new prototyping templates available. So I've already downloaded the Kinotopia template library, and it'll be over on the right side here. I'll close that, open up my Keynote bundle, and I'm going to be designing for the iPhone. Surprise, surprise. So I'm going to open up the iPhone 6 iOS 8 template. And what's great about Kinotopia is it gives me all of these different stencils inside of that library, but it also, it also automatically formats what size I'm trying to build for. So you see all of the custom sizes there. I can choose how wide or high the template is. And since this is already pre-matted for the iPhone, I'll just add a blank slide at the beginning, and I'll start building from there. All of these other stencil libraries, I might use them, I might not, depending on whether I want to design my own interface or use convention. So since we're going with a more disruptive interface on this one, we're probably not going to use a lot of convention. So now I'm ready to get started. So now that I've set the dimensions and basically made all of my template ready, the next step would be to screenshot the UI that inspired my design idea. So this is the Economist application that we were looking at before. Well, drop the screenshot into your template and decrease the opacity of the screenshot, and that looks a little bit like this. So now that I have a blank canvas, I drag the screenshot from my iPhone onto the canvas, and I select on that picture, and I'm going to change the opacity to, I usually like to do it around 30%. That way I can start overlaying things on top of it and basically getting down the places that I'm going to put UI elements into. So now we're going to move on to actually building a mockup. So now that I've decreased the opacity of the background image, I can put shapes or pretty much any elements on top of it. And this is going to be very effective for building out the basic skeleton of the application I'm trying to make. And what's nice is you can choose which things you want to take and which things maybe you don't want to take. For instance, I'm not going to take the Economist logo in the top left corner, and I might change the orientation of the text a little bit. We'll see. But as you can see here, I'm going along, just kind of making things look similar to what the Economist application looks like. We'll move on. So now we're going to our fourth step, which is to start design away. So this design, the only real point of this design is to get my ideas point across. It does not need to be perfect. It doesn't even need to be necessarily pretty. It just needs to convey what I'm trying to do with the application. You can incorporate elements from other apps. So for instance, although I based this app design on the Economist screenshot, I also really like some things from Google Docs and from Slack that I want to bring into this application. So I will. Try to use real content instead of placeholders. I find that as you use real content, the app starts to take a little bit more life than if you just put placeholders. So sometimes that's possible and sometimes that's not. If you're feeling particularly lazy, it might not be possible, but try not to use placeholders as often as you can. So that's what I'm just going to run this little time lapse as well, showing you what my design process looks like. Most of this is just playing around with things until they look right, until they look the way that you want them to. And you can see that I can be a little bit obsessive, where I try to get one thing right, just perfect. And that trying to let go of that and just getting down the basic idea is the part of this that is important. So you'll see that I'm using the basic structure from the Economist app, but I'm pulling in other parts of, say, that Facebook paper app where I have scrolling tiles that I can see visuals from. And you'll see at the top I have that class 1, class 2, class 3 navigation that will drive a lot of the application. I put in a menu bar, that way I can add new things to these different sections. And you'll see now I have 2 different screenshots. I find that 3 screenshots is really the sweet spot, where if you can show 3 screenshots from your application, it shows the general use cases of all of them. So now, in just a matter of a couple hours, I've gone from writing something down on my notebook to having a fairly okay looking prototype. So first, we set features of that day's app. Second, we found UIs to model after, both conventional and disruptive. Third, we created a template to mock up and brought that in and made it opaque so that we could design over it. And fourth, we put down our ideas. And we tried to do that as quickly as possible and without a little concern as possible, just kind of shooting by the hip. And this is what we ended up with. This is not the best looking application I've ever designed, and there's lots of different changes I already want to make. For instance, I think that maybe the class structure at the top needs to be in a different color, and possibly rethinking the text orientation. But these are different things that I think the next step really in this process would be taking these screenshots to somebody else, to users who would use this application. So for instance, I probably will show these screenshots to my team members at the Brand Center and ask them if this is something they want to use. Get ideas from their feedback and then return to this prototyping process a couple more times. I probably want to do maybe 2 more static screenshots before I even attempted to do animation. So on the next prototype method, we're going to talk about user testing, about usability, creating animation, and form versus function. But in the meantime, we're going to do this little design challenge. So you can find more details at these 3 sites. The first site is about how to make a hit app. That's David Wiskus article. The second is the Apple Fake It Till You Make It video, which again I really recommend. And then third is more about the prototype method from my site. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you did too. Have a good night.